are going to conclude our discussion on buying behaviors by looking at the B2B market, but specifically looking at who makes the buying decision and the process that they go through. So let's take a look at this. Who actually makes the decision to buy within an organization? Well, keep in mind it's going to be different for every organization depending on how large your organization is and also how formal or informal it may be in its operations. What I'm going to do is be going through and describing different roles that are played within the buying process. You may have one person doing one role. You may have 100 people in one role. You may have one person doing multiple roles. It doesn't matter. We're concerned with the roles, not the number of people. But as you'll see, there's a lot of different roles involved in this whole thing. We call this the buying center. Everybody who's involved in one way or another with the buying decision is a member of the buying center. The first role that we're going to look at is the initiator. And the initiator is the one who brings the issue to the attention of the other members of the buying center. Look, we need to do something about this. Maybe we're running low on product. Maybe we're not being competitive because we need a higher quality component part. There could be a number of different issues or reasons or ways that this attention comes up. But the initiator is the one who gets it started. What's important here is that the initiators listen to. That whoever that initiator may be, whether it's a frontline person, somebody in a factory, whether it's a top executive, that there is a way for them to get that information across, that we have a need that has to be addressed. We have a concern that needs to be addressed. And we'll talk about purchasing agents in a moment, but that's what the purchasing agents need to do, make sure they're constantly gathering that information that there are needs out there. Okay, so once we know we have a need available, the second step, or the second role that we're looking at, is that of the user. The user, this may come as a real surprise to you, is the person who uses this product or will be using this product. Hopefully the user has a lot of input within this buying decision. However, if you currently work within an organization, you know that unfortunately that doesn't always happen, that the decision is made without the input of the user. But they're the ones who understand what works well and what doesn't work, what's necessary and what isn't necessary. So they are a vital part of this whole buying process. We also have gatekeepers. And gatekeepers control the flow of information. Okay, they control the flow of information. And this could be performed by a number of different people within the organization. We initially tend to think of purchasing agents and people higher up being the ones who are collecting information and deciding what needs to go forward and what doesn't. But one position within the company that really plays this role and should not be ignored is that of the administrative assistant or secretary. Nobody gets past her desk, and I'm using the term her generically, not genetically. Please don't write me letters. Nobody gets past her desk without her permission. When the mail comes in, she sorts it. She decides what's high priority, what isn't. When somebody's trying to call, make appointments, she determines what's high priority, what isn't. That's her job. So you want to recognize the role of the secretary or administrative assistant within this buying process as well. Because if they don't think that your proposition, that your appointment is a priority, you won't get through, period. Within the buying process, we also have the role of the influencer. And the influencer is anyone who has something of value to contribute to this decision. It may be a vice president in a totally unrelated area where they call up and say, hey, you know what? I understand you're looking to buy a product like such and such. I don't want to put any pressure on you and I don't want you to feel any obligation, but my brother-in-law, who he's been really good since he's been on parole, he just started a business in that area. And, you know, if you could look at his company, that'd be great. Guess what? You're going to look at his company. You won't necessarily go with it, Okay, hopefully there's enough ethics involved there that you won't go with it, but you'll consider it. In this case, that vice president was an influencer. But again, to go back to something I said just a moment ago, hopefully the users are influencers as well. We're seeking their opinion. We're getting their thoughts on what would be a good purchase. So the influencer can come from a lot of different areas, and it may also be outside the organization, as we use influence from the different salespeople, for example. The decider is the person who decides what product is going to be purchased from what vendor or supplier. Vendor and supplier mean the same thing, and I'll be using the two terms interchangeably today. What most consumers don't realize that in the B2B market, picking your vendor is really more important than picking the product. A number of vendors can supply that product for you. They can get it. They can source it. Unless it's a patented item or something that's protected, you can get it from a number of different sources. So the big decision is, okay, we want this product, but who are we going to get it from? And there's a lot of details involved in that, from pricing to delivery to cooperative arrangements, a lot of different things. So the decider will decide what product from what vendor. The last role we're going to look at is that of a buyer. And a buyer negotiates the deal. Okay, the decider has already made that decision. Here's who we're going to go with. Let's just go ahead and go with them. Well, the buyer's going to sit down then and say, all right, let's talk. When is this product delivered? How many times is it going to be delivered a week? We want it delivered on these specific days at these specific times. This is what we're willing to pay in markup. This is the markdown money we want for product that doesn't move. There's a lot of information that gets involved in negotiated in signing a contract, and that's the buyer's responsibility. Now, in your company, you may use that term buyer differently. Fine. Another term that you probably use, I mentioned earlier, is purchasing agent. I purposely did not define a purchasing agent, and I'm not going to, because every organization uses the term a little bit differently. For some organizations, they'll have one decider and then a lot of buyers, and they call those buyers purchasing agents. So in that case, they're fulfilling the role of the buyer. Sometimes they'll have the purchasing agent is fulfilling the role of the decider. And sometimes the purchasing agent does both. There's no right or wrong here. It's totally up to what your company wants to do. Again, what we're trying to get across is these different roles that are played out within the buying center. Okay, so now that we know who's involved in this decision, let's take a look at the decision process itself. As you can see, this is very similar, well, pretty much almost identical, to the consumer buying decision, going through the same process. However, this is going to be much more formal. Whoever is making this decision is going to be held accountable for it. In the consumer market, if you as a consumer make a bad decision, you're only accountable to yourself and maybe your family. But if you make a bad decision, buying decision in the workplace, the company can lose tons of money, you can lose your job, there's a lot more risk involved. So we go through this process much more formally and deliberately than we do in the consumer process. Problem recognition is the same. We need to be aware that there's a problem. And usually the people who are making the buying decision are not the ones using the product. So that awareness has to come from somebody else. And that's where hopefully the initiator's coming in. They're bringing it to our attention. The second stage, the information search, means we're going to look for information internally and externally. Internally, what we're looking for specifically is product specifications. What do we need to satisfy this want, this need within the company? And in the product specifications, we're going to specify between two things. We're going to look at what's needed and what's desired. And those are key issues, because what is needed, what we have to have, will determine who we can do business with and who we can't. If a supplier can't meet those needs, they're off the list. Okay, we're not going to consider them. But those items that are desired that we'd like to have but we don't have to have, those are things that give us some negotiation power. And so we want to make sure we know everything that we need and everything we desire so we can choose the right vendor and then have good negotiating power when we get in there and try and get as many of those things as we can. Also in the information search, we'll start gathering the information about the possible vendors that could satisfy those needs. The third step is to evaluate the vendors and the product offerings. We are going to accept bids, we will probably get some samples, and we will thoroughly evaluate and test what this is. We don't want to go in blind, hey, you look like a nice person, okay, come on, we'll do business with you. Our job means more to us than that. We've got to make sure that we're doing our homework right, and anybody that we're seriously considering, we have documentation that they can provide our needs. So we spend a lot of time on this step, thoroughly evaluating the different alternatives. We then come to the fourth step, where we'll actually choose which product we're buying and which supplier. Another decision we will make here is if we want to go with one supplier, which is called sole sourcing, or if we want to go with multiple suppliers, which is called multiple sourcing. With sole sourcing, we're taking a little bit of a risk because if anything happens and we don't get our product delivered from them, we're out of product. However, the benefit with sole sourcing is when we commit to a supplier like that, we become their preferred customer. We usually get preferred pricing. We will get preferred treatment. So if they are running short on inventory, we get it first before other customers. So there's some real advantages. With multiple sourcing, we won't get that preferential treatment, but we'll never run out of product. We'll always have backups available. We'll always have another company we can go to if we need to. And the last step is post-purchase evaluation. Now remember when we talked about this in consumers, we said most of the time this is subconscious, that we do it all the time and we're not even aware that we're doing it. It's totally different in the business marketplace here. This is a very formal process. We're going to create what we call a vendor analysis. We are going to formally document their deliveries, if they're complete, if there's substitutions, if there's invoice errors, if there's quality problems, how they handle problems when they arise, and they will arise. So we want to know how they handle it. These are things that we're going to document not only to protect ourselves professionally, but also the next time we go through this process and we're looking for suppliers and evaluating suppliers, we can pull out these previous vendor analysis and say, okay, we dealt with them before and had a real problem with such and such. Or we dealt with them before and, you know, they really came through for us. They were somebody who listened to us and were very responsive to our needs. Let's look at them again. So we can use this information over and over again. So again, it protects yourself and it's going to help you in future buying decisions. Okay, so let's summarize what we've talked about here in this segment. There is much more risk involved in a B2B buying decision than in a consumer buying decision. As I mentioned, a consumer is really just going to lose their investment in that purchase, where somebody in the B2B situation can lose their job and really hurt the organization. So there is more risk involved. The marketer should recognize that there is a process and multiple people and egos are involved in this decision. So just calling on somebody saying, hey, you know, let me take you out for lunch and let's go see if we can get you to buy this product isn't going to work. It has to go through this process. And in going through that process, a lot of people, all these people in the buying center, are going to have opinions and they're going to want their opinions listened to. And when they're not, you're going to have some ego issues and some backlashes. In fact, the purchasing agents, I hate to say it, it sounds like a fun job, I'd like it, except nobody's ever happy. You never satisfy everybody within your organization. So it is a position where there is a lot of conflict. And if you're considering that end of employment, it's a great area. There's always jobs available. There's a lot of room for advancement. But be aware that it is a stressful area. See you next time.